The morning sun beat down on Bakersfield, California, turning the asphalt into a shimmering mirage. Inside his small two-bay garage, Mark Jensen, a man weathered by the relentless demands of single fatherhood and a struggling business, was wrestling with a stubborn engine block. The air was thick with the scent of oil and gasoline, a familiar comfort that had defined his life for the past decade. His 10-year-old daughter, Lily, was his whole world, and every turn of the wrench, every greasy fingerprint, was a silent promise to give her a better life. The old radio in the corner, a relic from a different time, played a classic rock tune that was instantly drowned out by a sound that ripped through the quiet morning. It started as a low, guttural roar, the kind that vibrates in your bones, but it quickly escalated into a high-pitched metallic shriek that felt like the world was tearing itself apart. The ground trembled violently, causing a half-finished mug of coffee to spill across his workbench. Mark's heart hammered against his ribs as a massive plume of black, oily smoke billowed on the horizon, painting a grim stroke against the impossibly blue sky. He knew instantly that this wasn't a car crash. This was something far worse. "Lily, stay inside! Lock the door!" he yelled, his voice strained with urgency. He didn't wait for a response. He grabbed the heavy-duty fire extinguisher from its mount and scrambled into his rust-eaten pickup truck. The engine coughed to life, a testament to Mark's own mechanical prowess, and he floored it toward the rising smoke. The scene was pure, unadulterated chaos. A military jet, a ghost of its former self, lay in a crumpled heap in a dusty open field. Its nose was buried deep in the earth, and the tail section was a grotesque sculpture of twisted metal. Flames danced a hungry jig across the wreckage, the heat so intense it distorted the air around it. People were running, screaming, their faces a mask of horror and disbelief. Emergency sirens wailed in the distance, but for now it was just the locals and the growing inferno. Mark's mechanic's brain, a finely tuned instrument of problem-solving, immediately assessed the situation. He saw the crumpled cockpit, miraculously not a pile of rubble, and through a small, shattered pane of glass, he saw him, a pilot, slumped and unmoving in his seat. The pilot was still inside, and the flames were spreading rapidly. The fuselage was a ticking time bomb, and every second counted. Adrenaline surged through Mark's veins, a raw, primal force that drowned out the fear. He ignored the frantic shouts of a man in a police uniform who was trying to keep people back. He scaled the treacherous wreckage, the metal hot enough to blister his hands, his boots slipping on the slick, oil-covered debris. The heat was a living thing, a fiery breath on his neck, searing the hair on his arms and legs. He blasted the small fire near the cockpit with the extinguisher, creating a brief window of opportunity. The canopy was a twisted mess of shattered plexiglass and metal. It was jammed shut, trapping the pilot inside. Mark, fueled by a strength he didn't know he possessed, heaved against the bent metal with all his might. The steel groaned in protest, a chorus of tortured metal, but it finally gave way. He fought his way into the burning cockpit, the smoke burning his lungs. The pilot was a man in his late 30s, covered in soot and blood, his eyes closed. He was pinned by a mangled part of the dashboard, and Mark had to use every ounce of his strength to pry the heavy piece of metal away. With a final, desperate pull, he freed the man and dragged him out of the inferno. He pulled him across the field, away from the roaring heat, just as a hidden fuel line ruptured with a violent whoompee, sending a monstrous fireball into the sky. Mark collapsed beside the unconscious pilot, his lungs burning, his body trembling. As he knelt to check for a pulse, his hands shaking, his eyes fell upon the pilot's uniform. On his chest, glinting in the morning sun, were medals. Not one, but a row of them, each one a testament to courage, to sacrifice, to a life of service. Mark froze, the image seared into his mind. The medals weren't just shiny pieces of metal. They were stories. They were promises kept. They were a life that meant something. In that moment, a wave of profound emotion washed over him, awe, humility, and a strange, deep connection to this man he had just saved. It was a connection that would ripple through his life and change him in ways he could not yet comprehend. The hero's welcome Mark received was a jarring contrast to his quiet, hard-working life. His small garage, usually a sanctuary from the world, was suddenly a magnet for local news vans and reporters wielding microphones and cameras. The story of the single dad mechanic who saved the pilot was a local sensation. Mark, a man who preferred the company of engines to people, found himself thrust into the spotlight, hailed as a hero. But the title felt foreign on him. The word hero belonged to the man he had pulled from the fire, the man with the medals. The memory of those medals, of the life they represented, felt more real to him than the accolades he was receiving. A week after the crash, a sleek black sedan pulled up to his garage. Out stepped a woman in a crisp Air Force uniform, her demeanor a blend of professionalism and quiet gratitude. She introduced herself as Major Eva Rodriguez, Captain Hayes's commanding officer. She extended her hand, her grip firm and sincere. "Mark," she said, her voice steady, "I can't thank you enough. Captain Michael Hayes is recovering. He's stable, but he has a long road ahead. He's asked to meet you, if you're up for it." Mark's stomach twisted into a knot of anxiety. What would he say to a man like that? A man who had seen the world from the cockpit of a fighter jet, who had earned those medals with his blood and sweat. He was just a mechanic. He felt a deep sense of humility, almost of inadequacy, but he couldn't say no. The hospital room was a sterile, quiet place, a stark contrast to the chaos of the crash site. Captain Michael Hayes was a man of quiet strength, his face showing the strain of his injuries, but his eyes were clear and intelligent. His arm was in a sling, his leg in a cast, but when he saw Mark, a genuine, grateful smile lit up his face. "Mark Jensen," he said, his voice raspy from the smoke he had inhaled. "Thank you. You saved my life. I won't forget that." Over the next few weeks, an unlikely friendship blossomed. Mark, initially awkward and reserved, began to open up. He would visit Michael, bringing him coffee, and listening as the pilot talked about his life, his missions, and his family. A wife and 2 young kids waiting for him back home in Arizona. The medals, Michael explained, weren't just for him. They were for his family, for the sacrifices they made every time he got in the cockpit. In return, Mark shared his own story. He talked about his wife who passed away, leaving him to raise Lily alone. He spoke of the endless grind, the constant fear of not being able to provide, of the dreams he had for his daughter that felt 1,000,000 miles away. He told Michael about his passion for mechanics, how he could make an old engine purr like a kitten. Michael, a man who had dedicated his life to precision and flight, saw a different kind of heroism in Mark. One afternoon, as the sun streamed through the hospital window, Michael looked at Mark with a solemn expression. "Mark," he said, his voice filled with a weight of gratitude, "I've flown jets. I've seen things most people can't imagine. But what you did, rushing into that fire, that's a different kind of courage. And what you do every day, raising Lily, running your business, building a life from scratch, that takes more guts than anything I've ever done. The medals I have are for what I do in the sky, but you're a hero on the ground, and that's something else entirely." Michael's words were a revelation to Mark. He had always seen his struggles as failures, as a constant battle he was barely winning. But Michael's perspective, this man of great courage and honor, made him see his life in a new light. He wasn't a failure. He was a survivor. He was a father fighting for his daughter's future. The medals weren't the only symbols of heroism. His own calloused hands, his weary heart, and his unwavering love for Lily were medals of their own kind. Months passed, and the hospital visits turned into regular meetings at Mark's garage. Michael, now out of the hospital and in physical therapy, was a familiar face among the cars and tools. He would sit on an overturned oil drum, a coffee mug warming his hands, and watch Mark work. Their friendship, forged in the heat of a burning fuselage, had deepened into a mutual respect and admiration. Michael, a man who was used to planning every detail of a mission, saw Mark's quiet, methodical dedication and wanted to help him achieve his dreams. Using his network, Michael introduced Mark to the owner of a local aviation school. He vouched for Mark's skills and character, telling them the story of how a man who had every reason to stay back rushed into a fire to save a stranger. He convinced them that Mark was the man they needed to handle the maintenance of their training fleet. The contract was a game-changer. It was the break Mark had been praying for. The steady income allowed him to hire a second mechanic, a young apprentice eager to learn. He invested in new equipment, the old garage slowly transforming into a modern, thriving business. The constant knot of financial anxiety in his stomach began to loosen, replaced by a quiet, burgeoning confidence. Lily, too, was flourishing. With less stress on her father, she saw a side of him that was more relaxed and joyful. A year after the crash, Michael, now fully recovered and cleared for duty, was preparing to be redeployed. He came to the garage one last time. The space was unrecognizable from the dusty, struggling shop he had first seen. Tools were organized, the floor was clean, and the air buzzed with the sound of work. He found Mark under the hood of a sleek new sedan, his face smudged with grease, but a genuine smile on his face. Michael clapped him on the shoulder. "Look at this place," he said, a note of genuine pride in his voice. "I told you, you didn't need a hero." Mark turned, his eyes meeting Michael's. A year ago, he would have agreed. But so much had changed. "You're wrong," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "I did need a hero. I just didn't realize it until I met one. You saved me in a different way, Michael. You didn't just give me a contract. You gave me a chance to see myself for who I really am." Michael's face softened, a profound understanding passing between them. He saw in Mark not just the man who had saved his life, but a reflection of his own core values. The medals he wore represented a life of duty and service, a life of sacrifice. But the true heroism, the kind that built a life from scratch, that raised a child with unwavering love, that fought for a better future every single day, that was what Mark represented. Mark watched as Michael drove away, a new feeling of peace settling over him. He was no longer just a struggling mechanic. He was a business owner, a loving father, and a friend. The hero wasn't just the man in the jet, but the man who, through an act of courage and an unlikely friendship, had finally found his own strength and built a new horizon for himself and for his daughter.